At the end of this video, you'll be able to go from one side of the map to the other in a seamless transition, and we'll be able to fight planes, destroy them, and die. Hey, I'm Max, and welcome to part 3 of the plane shooter game tutorial. Today we're going to make the map longer and loop, so when you go far to the left you come back to the right, and we're going to add enemies that shoot at us and that we can shoot at. Let's get right into it. So first off, we need to make this ground a lot bigger. But if we stretch it like this, it also stretches the textures, and depending on the ground you use, it might look bad and stretched. So instead of stretching it, what we're going to do is set the draw mode to tiled, and here increase our, not the width, the height, because it's a vertical in my case, but if you have a horizontal one, increase the width. And what that's going to do is make it so the ground is going to be tiled, so it's not going to stretch it, but instead repeat the texture. I'll make the map at least 100 big, probably bigger if we need later, but for now 100 is going to be okay. And I'll center it at 0x, so this way I know it goes 50 to the left and 50 to the right. Don't forget to edit your box collider and stretch it to the size of the ground as well. And also, to prevent the player from going too far up, I'll duplicate the ground, put it at the top, actually a little bit further up, and I'll rename it ceiling to not confuse it. Okay, now let's go in our player controller, and we'll just add a quick check every fixed update to make sure that we're not too far to the left or to the right, and if we are, we'll just teleport to the other side. And to the player, that's going to look very smooth. So for now, we'll just do if transform.position.x is less than -40, so we don't see the edge of the map. We will do RB for the rigid body dot move position, and then new vector 2 40, and then the transform dot position dot y, so we keep our y value. And we will just do the opposite for the other one, so else if the position is greater than 40, we'll set it to -40. Okay, so I'm approaching -40, and I just got teleported to 40. So that's working fine. I'll just show you in the scene view real quick so you don't get confused. So here's the game view and the scene view, and you'll see what happens when we reach the end. And there you go, we get teleported at the start. So from the player point of view, it looks the same. Okay, now let's add the HP to the player and create some enemies. For that, I'll actually use one script for the health of both the player and the enemies, as that's going to simplify things a lot. Because if we use a different script from the player and for the enemies, we have to make a function for player hitting the enemy and enemy hitting the player, and that creates a lot of code for no reason when you can just create one script for both. So let's do that. I'll just create a script and call it something like entity or plane. Actually, I'll call it plane since it's a plane game, and let's open it up. In this class, I'm just going to create a public float HP and max HP. And I'm going to create a simple public void damage to damage the plane with a parameter amount, so the amount of damage we want to do to the plane. And I'll simply do HP minus equal amount, which is going to remove amount from HP. And here I just have to do if HP is less than 0, then we destroy the game object attached to the plane, so the plane. And here we can add particles later, like an explosion or something, but for now let's just delete it. Okay, so I just exported real quick a white and dark gray version of my plane. That's for the enemies. I didn't think about it first, but I'll add it to the description in the download. So if you download it after this video came out, you probably already have it. So to create enemies, I'll just drag the plane in, and I'll rename it enemy to not get confusing. I'll move it a little bit and set origin layer to 1 so it's above. I'll set the pixel per unit to 1920, just like the player plane. And just like the player plane, I'll set it to scale 2:2. The reason why I made the enemy plane white is not because I actually want them to be white, it's because I want to set the color in the editor of Unity. And that way, I can have multiple enemies of different colors. So this one, I'll set it to a kind of dark red and see how that looks. That looks pretty cool. I will give this enemy a minigun as well and place it at the right spot with origin layer 1 as well. That looks good. I will also give it a shoot point just like the player, So shoot point, and I'll drag it to the tip of the minigun. And now we just have to add the enemy script so we can make them move towards the player or away and shoot him and all that stuff. So here in the script I'll create a new C# script and I'll call it enemy. And the enemy class, since I wanted to be able to follow the player, I know there's only going to be one player, so there's no problem doing this. I'll do private player controller and then player. And since obviously I don't want to drag my player into my enemy every time, I'll just do player equals to find object of type player controller. Now that can cause problems sometimes, but if you just have one, it should always get the right one. If you do this with something that you have multiple instances of, it can not always get the one you want. Here I'll put fixed update just like the player, and for now I'll just make it move towards the player. So I'll get the private rigid body. I forgot to add it too, so I need to think about adding it. And I'll do RB equals get component rigid body. And here I'll just do rb.addForce player.transform.position minus transform.position, so in the direction of the player. And we'll do let's say the speed. I'll actually create a variables for the speed so we can have multiple enemies with different speed. That can add some interesting aspects, and I'll do time speed. Now let's go on our enemy, add our enemy script, set a speed of let's say 5 to see how that looks, and of course a rigid body. While I'm at it, I'll also add the plane script that we did earlier with the HP, and I'll set an HP of let's say 10 and max HP of 10, and I'll also do it on the player since we want the player to be able to be shot as well, and I'll do 20-20 for the player. And oops, I just realized that here I put a equals instead of a minus, so if you copied that wrong. Okay, so the enemy is going through the floor because we forgot to give it a capsule collider. Let's do that real quick. Horizontal, edit, squish it a little bit, and that's good. Now let's see if that works. Okay, it is moving towards the player, but it's pretty slow. I set it to 1, but I said 5, and now let's try 5 for real. And okay, that seems to be working. Obviously the angle is not right, so we need to fix this. We will do something similar to the player, so instead of putting this here, we'll create a vector2 direction equals to this, and here we will direction.normalize, so the enemy planes don't go faster if you're further. And here we'll do direction.speed times speed. And then we'll do kind of like the player, so we do float angle equals to matf.atan of direction y divided by direction x times matf.rad2 degree. And we'll do just like the player, so if direction.x is less than 0, we'll do angle plus equal 180. And then we just have to do transform.rotation equals to quaternon.euler new vector3, and now we put in our angles, which are going to be 0, 0, and then the angle. Let's see if that works. Okay, so the angle is working, but our plane is moving very strangely. So to fix the weird movement in the enemy plane, we'll actually give it 5 linear drag, just like a player. And we actually want to disable the gravity because that's useless for the enemy since it's always going to go towards the player. So let's see how it goes now. And it does work, but it's very slow. Let's try 15 speed. That's still pretty slow. So probably 25. 25 speed seems pretty good to me. Now I actually want the enemy planes to fly towards the player when they're too far, and when they get close enough, they start aiming at him and shooting at him. So I'll actually copy the code for shooting from the player controller. So I just need to add the private float shoot timer. And here I'll do if vector3.distance between the player.transform.position and the transform.position of the plane is greater than, let's say, 5, then I'll move, which is this code here that we have. And if it's less than 5, then I'll shoot. of course I need to add the public game object bullet prefab and the public transform shoot point. Here in the else statement I actually need to also do if shoot timer is less than time.time to make sure that it doesn't shoot too fast. And for some reason over here one of my brackets deleted, so let's put that back. Don't forget to go on your enemy script, on your enemy object, and drag in the bullet prefab from, oh actually we need to create another prefab because this is the player bullet. So the way I create another prefab, I don't know if it's the best way, but I just drag it in the scene and I right click and unpack prefab completely, and that simply makes it no longer a prefab. And then I just rename it to, let's say, enemy bullet, and then add another layer, enemy bullet, then go on the object, set it to enemy bullet, and I just drag it in as a new prefab. Then I can delete it in the scene, go in enemy and drag in the bullet prefab, enemy bullet, and the shoot point is under the enemy. Now that we created a new layer for the enemy bullet, we have to go to edit, project settings, physics 2D, and unchecked enemy bullets, and we also need to create a new layer for the enemy. That's right, so add layer enemy, put the enemy on it, yes, and then edit, project settings, physics 2D, and enemy bullet enemy. Right here we want to uncheck that as well. If we don't do that, the enemy can shoot itself. So now as you can see, if we are far from the enemy, it flies towards us, and when it gets close, it shoots towards us. Now the angle doesn't get updated when they shoot. That's a problem. And also they shoot kind of too close. So let's make the distance a bit bigger, maybe 10. And the angle code right here, instead of putting it in the movement, we actually want to put it at the end. So when we are far, he flies towards us, and when we get close, he starts shooting at us. Actually, I'm starting to realize that making him stop when he shoots doesn't make much sense, because we still keep moving when we shoot. So let's make him keep moving while he shoots. So here I'll actually put the movement just outside of the if, and here we will actually invert this if inside of this if right here. So we'll do if it's less than 10 and shoot timer is ready, then shoot. So that was kind of unnecessary. I hope that didn't confuse you too much. In a way, it might seem weird for me in a tutorial to show you fails like this, but when you make a game, you don't always get everything right the first time, so you have to learn from your mistakes, and I think that's a big part of the tutorial as well. So now you can see it works fine, and if I'm boosting, I can dodge the bullets. Now let's add the damage so we can destroy him and he can destroy us. To do this, we'll just go in the projectile in the untrigger enter 2D, and we'll do if collision, which is the other object with which the bullet collided, dot get component plane. So if it's a plane, so here we'll do if not equal to null. So if the component hit by the projectile has a component plane, we'll do collision.getComponentPlane.damage, and then we'll do 1 for now. And this is the advantage of creating another script for the plane instead of doing one for the player and one for the enemy, because if we did 2, we would have to do here if the component player is here, damage the player, and if the component enemy is here, damage the enemy. So by doing this, we reduce the lines we need. Okay, let's see if he can kill us now. I'll just go on my plane here and check the HP. So my HP is going down, and when I reach 0 I should die. Okay, so I actually died after reaching 0, like below 0, and obviously now the game is supposed to be over, so the enemy doesn't know what to do, and I'll just try killing the enemy instead. So right now the combat is a little bit weird. It's kind of spinning around while shooting, and there you go, I killed him. So I'll just go real quick fix here. Instead of doing less than 0, just do less or equal to 0, so when you reach 0 you also die. Now let's also add a UI so we can see how much HP we have. So here I'll go on the canvas. I'll actually just duplicate my text here, bring it down a little. I'll make it green for HP, Then I'll go on my UI script, I'll add a text HP text, and in the update here I'll just do HP text.text equals to player controller dot get component plain dot HP, and I'll do plus on, and then the same thing, player controller. Actually we don't want to do get component every update, so I'll just copy this here, and here I'll create a private plain player plain, and in the start here I'll do player plain equals to player controller get component plain, and here I just have to do player plain and player plain dot max HP. Doing a get component every frame is not a good idea. Don't forget to add the second text as the HP text. Here I kept the name text and text1, but you should probably rename them gas and HP text. So as you can see now, when we get shot, our text is going down to show us we now have 10/20 HP. Okay, now let's try to make the enemies a little bit more interesting, because if they just follow you around and shoot you, it's a bit boring. So a good way to do this, I think, will be to add state of the enemy. So it will go from shooting you to flying away, and then shooting you and flying away again. For that, let's go in our enemy script and add a float. Actually, we can just add it after the timer, and we'll do state timer, something like that, doesn't really matter. And here I'll add a private bool shooting to show if the enemy plane is trying to shoot you. So here before the bullet code, we just do if shooting, and we put all that in. That way it will only happen if we are currently in the shooting state. And here we'll do if if state timer is less than time. We'll do shooting equals not shooting, so it's going to change between shooting and not shooting, and it's going to set the state timer to time.time plus, let's say we want to switch every 5 seconds or so. And just to make sure that when we get in the range of the player, we start shooting immediately, because we don't want to fly towards the player and when we reach him fly away. It doesn't make sense. We'll just do a quick else here and just do shooting equals true and state timer equals time.time plus 5. And then we have to add the fly away when we're not shooting. So when we're not shooting, I'll actually do dir times equal -1 to invert the direction, and I actually want to put the movement below so that it happens after we invert the direction. A little problem here that we have is that our if has two things, and we only want this to happen when the first thing, so when we're not close enough, but when the shoot timer is not ready, we don't want to set shooting to true and the timer up, because that's going to prevent the timer from ever ticking here. So we actually want to take this part of the if, and so here we just have to do if the shoot timer is ready, then we shoot. And the reason why we don't put the if here is because in the else we invert the direction if we're not shooting, and we don't want to invert the direction every time the shoot timer is not ready. Okay, so now he's shooting at us. Let's see what he does after 5 seconds. Oh, he starts running away. He's always running away exactly in the opposite direction though, so that's a bit weird, but I guess that's gonna work for now. And now he starts shooting again. Now what we can do is make the enemy spawn naturally in the map, and maybe even with the timer so it spawns every couple seconds. For that, I'll turn my enemy into a prefab so I can spawn it. I'll delete the one in the scene already, and I'll create a new script called something like game so I can manage the spawn. In my game script, I'll just create a public game object enemy prefab. I'll also create a private float spawn timer, and here in the update I'll do if spawn timer is less than time.time as usual. Then I will instantiate a enemy prefab, so I'll create an enemy, and now I need to specify the position. For the position, I'll actually do new vector 3, and for the position I'll do random.range And I'll do minus 40 to 40 since that's the range of our map. And here I'll do random.range. For the Y I'll do something like minus 2, 2. And for the Z I'll just do 0. And for the rotation I'll just do quaternon.identity. And of course reset the spawn timer to time plus, let's say 10. Now we just have to create an empty game object, call it game or whatever you want, and then add the game script that we just created and drag the enemy prefab in. Okay, now 2 enemies have spawned. I'll just keep going until I reach the edge of the map and it teleports me to the other side. Now a 3rd enemy has spawned. And also the enemies colliding with the player feels kind of weird, and if there's a lot of enemies it can get buggy and everything. So I think I'll just disable them as well. So I'll go in project settings, physics 2D, and then player, enemy right here. I'll uncheck that. Okay, that feels a lot better. Now another issue that you may notice is that if we go on the edge and then we get teleported to the other side, the enemies don't follow us. Okay, so all we have to do to fix the enemies not following when we go from one side of the map to the other is do if matf.abs, which means the absolute value of the direction.x. So if the absolute value of our direction x is greater than 40, so if the player is more than 40 units away, then we want to go in the opposite direction. So dar.x times equal -1, because if the player is more than 40 units away, then it's faster to go in the opposite direction and go from one side to the other. Now we also need to give it the ability to go from one side of the map to the other, so we'll do if transform.position.x is less than -40, and we also add a check for the direction since we will be teleporting the enemies further than -40. We'll see that soon. And inside we'll do transform.position equals to new vector 3 minus 40 transform.position.y, so we keep our y, and then 0, so we can keep the z 0. And we'll do the same for the opposite, so I'll just copy and paste. And when we're greater than 40 and direction less than greater than 0, so when we're going to the right and we're greater than 40, then we'll teleport to -40. And also in the player controller you want to change from rb.movePosition to just setting the transform.position, because rb.movePosition can sometimes be snappy and it also cause weird velocity and everything because it calculates the physics on the way and all that stuff, and we don't need that, so just do transform.position for the player controller too. And then here in the enemy we want to do if transform.position.x is less than -30 this time, and the player.transform.position.x is greater than 30, so if the enemy is on one side of the map and the player is on the other side, we actually want to teleport the enemy, so transform.position to transform.position plus new vector 3 80 0 0. And what that's going to do is if the enemy is on the left side and the player is on the right side, it's going to teleport the enemy on the right side but on the right of the player, so actually outside of the map technically, since it's going to be like at 50 and the map technically ends at 40. But that's going to make it so if they're both on each end of the map, you're going to be able to see the enemy anyway. And we'll do the same thing for the other way, so if it's greater than 30 and the position of the player is less than -30, then we'll do -80. That should make it so the enemies keep following us even if we go on the other side of the edge, so let's see if that works. And we should also be able to see them teleport. Oh, see, he switched side because he realized the other side was faster. And if we switch, we can see the plane keeps following us and we keep seeing him even if we switch. But as you can see, it looks a little bit snappy, like the plane disappears for a fraction of a second. That's because we do it in the fix update. So if the fix update doesn't happen exactly when we switch side, it looks a little bit snappy. So let's fix this by making sure that the enemies get teleported every time we switch. So for this we'll just go in player controller, and over here we will just loop through all the enemies. So we create an enemy array, and we'll do find objects with an S of type. Make sure there's an S and not just one object of type enemy. So this will find all the enemies, and then we'll do for each enemy E in enemies, and we will simply do if that enemy position X is less than -30. So if we are going on the left side and the enemy is close enough that we can see it, so within 10, which means that we can see it, then we want to teleport it on the other side at the same time as we teleport the player, so it doesn't look snappy. So we'll just do e.transform.position equals e.transform.position plus new vector 3 80 0 80 0 0, just like we did in the enemy class. And I'll do the same thing for the other side, but as usual inverted. So if it's greater than 30, we'll do -80. So let's see if it still looks snappy. So let's switch while the plane is next to us, and I don't see any snap at all. Actually, I don't even notice it. Yeah, this is pretty good. So thanks for watching the third episode of the plane shooter game tutorial. Make sure to subscribe and watch the next episode if you want to see the rest, how to add more things. In the next episode we will probably add a minimap and explosions when we destroy planes, and we can also try adding other type of guns and upgrades.